Head Snipe, how are you? Hey everybody, come on in here. It's a beautiful Sunday morning. Where I am anyway. Where you are might be different. But I know what you're all here for. Coffee with Scott Adams and the simultaneous sip. And I will not deny you any longer. Raise your mug, your cup, your glass, your stein, your tankard. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me for the simultaneous sip. What happened to my Twitter account, someone says? Nothing, I hope. It better still be there. So I saw in the news that Alexandre Octavio Cortez has changed her Twitter handle. So I think it was something with 2018 in it, and she realized she had to update it. And so her new Twitter handle is @AOC. So one of the smartest things that Alexandra could do, let's call her AOC, is have a cool nickname. There is great power in cool nicknames. And she's sort of just given herself one, AOC. I think other people were using that, and she's just adopting something she knows works. But let me tell you a story. When I went to college, the first week of college, I got a nickname. And my nickname was W, just the letter W. And there's a story behind it. I grew up in a town called Wyndham. I wore a shirt that had a big W on it. And my roommate nicknamed me W. So for 4 years, even some of my closest friends didn't know my last name or even my real name. So for 4 years, I was just W. When we played sports, we had a little soccer team, co-ed soccer team we would play on weekends and stuff. And when people were calling out to me, they'd be calling out W, W. And because I had a nickname, I was a little extra cool or a little extra interesting. There was something about a nickname that just added a little bit of an X factor to it. And I wasn't the only one. There were other people who had nicknames. And the people who had nicknames that stuck and that were generally used, they stood out a little bit. There was just something special about them because they didn't have regular names. They had nicknames. So it's clever for Alexandra to assign herself at least a Twitter handle that has AOC, because that will probably help make that her nickname. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 years you see, think of other people who have nicknames. All right, LBJ, JFK, MLK, who else? Can you think of anybody else in politics? FDR. So if you think about it, the people who have nicknames that are 3 initials do pretty well. They did. HRC, there's another good one. All right, here's another story. So do you remember years ago, you don't remember this, but before the American Revolution, our system of government was a monarchy. So we had a king of England before the revolution. Then the revolution happened, and our business model changed from a king situation to a republic. So it's a democratic process, but it's basically a republic. And lately, I don't know if you've noticed that our system of government has changed. It's a fairly recent change. Oh yeah, our RBG is another one, 3-letter name. But our system of government has changed. And if you haven't noticed, our system of government is now basically dependent on which side, the Democrats or the Republicans, can torture random government officials the longest. That's what a government that's what a government shutdown is. The government shutdown reminds me of a sci-fi. It reminds me of, there was an old Star Trek episode where there were two civilizations, two different planets, and instead of fighting militarily for years, they had decided to hold some kind of a, I don't know, lottery or something to decide who was winning, and then the losing team would have their citizens line up to be executed, but in a painless way. So they'd figured out how to make war painless. And I thought, and of course the point of the episode, or so I took it to be the point, is that things can become absurd very easily. You know, war is absurd enough by having a representative war where people line up to be executed if their team loses some random contest, you know, takes it to the next extreme. But now with the government close down, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the government process is which team is willing to torture random government employees the longest? Am I wrong about that? Because whoever tortures them the longest is going to get their way. So in the old days, it was sort of a, you know, the king made the decision. And then we changed to a new system where, you know, voting mattered. So it kind of mattered who you voted for, the republic. But now we're in a new system, at least between elections, we have a new system where it doesn't really matter what the public wants, does it? I don't think it matters. And we can't vote in between elections. So we, the public, are just watching the government work. And what the government has decided is that they're going to decide on a major policy by seeing which side is willing to torture random government employees the longest. Whoever can make these government employees twist for the longest without paychecks gets to win. Now, can you think of a more absurd way to run a government? You know, you can understand, you know, how we got to this place, it all makes sense. But how did we get to a government where it's a contest to see who can torture random people the most, and then that one will win a policy that has nothing to do with the random people? The people who are being tortured are not even relevant to the question of building a wall. They're literally just other people that, for, you know, a coincidence of history, we can torture them by denying their paychecks for as long as this goes on. So it's just sort of crazy that we've sort of evolved into thinking that any of this is okay. How not okay is this? That our government process depends on torturing random employees. I'm not even exaggerating, am I? I mean, you know, torture's hyperbole, but you know what I mean. We're making them very, very uncomfortable, stressed out, inconvenienced. You know, there might even be health impacts. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. So how did we get here? All right. Every once in a while, I like to turn on CNN for entertainment. And today there was a pundit on there arguing very angrily that walls don't work. Now, how much further into uselessness can you fall to say that walls don't work? In what context did a wall ever not work? Can you name 10 walls, and then how many of those 10 walls that you named didn't work? 0? How often does a wall not work? I don't think that ever happened. Now, of course, they may be confusing whether it works with whether it stops 100% of all the people and all the drugs. Now, of course, no wall is going to stop 100% of the people or 100% of the drugs, or maybe even any of the drugs. But friction always works. If you make something harder, fewer people are going to do it. That is guaranteed. Now, you could argue that, well, it won't reduce it enough to make it worth the pay or worth the cost. You could say other mechanisms are better. But they were actually arguing that drones and electronic stuff would be more effective than a wall. To which I say, who did that study? And is that going to be true for every segment of the border, which is very long and very different at each place? Who comes up with the idea that the electronic, drone mechanism is going to be better than a wall in every section along the wall? That's just generally true. It borders on stupid, doesn't it? I don't like to use that word very much when it comes to politics, because I think it's sort of a lazy way to look at politics, to just say that the other side is being stupid. But unless you're an engineer who has actually studied the border and all the solutions, and you've seen tests where people have tested walls versus whatever the other mechanisms are, you don't really deserve to say your opinion in public. It seems to me that we're very close to the time, and I think it will happen after the new Congress is in office. So here's my prediction on the wall funding. First thing that has to happen is Nancy Pelosi has to be the majority leader. So we have to wait for her to get sworn in, or nothing's going to happen, right? She can't really negotiate from this position, so she needs to be sworn in. She needs to become the leader. So that has to happen first, and there won't be anything that happens before that. Once that happens, she's in a position to negotiate. Somebody is going to say, let's turn it over to the engineers and stop being engineers, we're just politicians. I don't know which side will say it first. Either the Democrats will say it first, or President Trump or a Republican will say it first. But whoever says those words will end the stalemate. They just have to say the words. And the words are some version of this: politicians should not make engineering decisions. Let's see what the engineers say, and then take a look at their recommendation. But we need a budget either way. So let's get as much budget as we can that makes sense, given how much you can actually spend in a year, and try some stuff. And if the engineers are uncertain, maybe we can try a little wall here, a little drone over there, and compare. See which one works best. Maybe that's the process forward. But until Pelosi's in charge and she can negotiate, and until somebody says those words, let's turn it over to the engineers, you won't have a solution, I don't think. All right. The president tweeted very encouraging words about the China trade negotiations. In the president's telling of events, there's been major progress in every area of interest. Now, every area would be trade and all the different categories of trade, but it would also be intellectual property and, I assume, fentanyl. So it sounds like, according to the president, that they have progress on all areas and things are looking positive. I retweeted that and said, I cautioned to wait until China weighs in, because until you've heard China's version of events, you don't quite know the whole story. China did weigh in with a more generic statement, but also positive. It was something about how China is committed to work through the storms, as they called it. They're committed to work through the storms to work productively with the United States. So there was no negativity in that, except that it's a hard process, and everybody agrees with that. So it's possible, and again, you should never take stock advice or investment advice from cartoonists, and this is not investment advice, but it would be hard to imagine that stocks would be lower after the trade deal gets done. I can't imagine any scenario in which the China trade deal starts to, get wrapped up and stocks are substantially lower this year after that happens. It's almost guaranteed to give the stock market a boost from a low point. So if you were going to predict, let's say I'll do this as a prediction and not a financial recommendation. So this is not a financial recommendation. But as a prediction, I'm almost positive that the stock market will be appreciably higher by the end of this year, assuming the China deal gets done, which I think everybody thinks will get done eventually. It might take a while. Now, here's some fun things. I tweeted a challenge on climate change. As I've complained many times, the problem with deciding what you want to think about climate change is that both sides talk in isolation, and you rarely see them on the same stage. And when you do, they don't really even debate each other. Rather, they each say their piece and then they sit down or take some questions. But you don't see anything that looks like an actual debate. Now, part of the problem, it's taken me a while to work through understanding the topic. But part of the problem is people are not talking about exactly the same stuff. The people who seem to be disagreeing are not exactly disagreeing with whatever the first person said. They're just saying something new, and the new part of it is just a new thing. So they don't really disagree, and so we watching it don't really have enough to go on. For example, so I tweeted 4 links that I thought captured the best two, in my opinion, the best 2 skeptics in terms of the points they're making, and 2 solid pro-science, pro-climate change, people on the side that climate change is a problem. So one of the sources was NASA. So there's a NASA site where they make their case. And you know the case. The case is very simply that CO2 is going up at the same rate as temperature, and that it's spiking sharply, and that although temperature has changed throughout history, we're seeing an unprecedented spike that matches exactly with the CO2. This is the NASA story, and that there's ice melting, and we can see the effects of it already, et cetera. And then there was a Bloomberg piece in which the Bloomberg piece did a good job of debunking the debunkers. So the Bloomberg piece was addressing the skeptics who say, no, it's not CO2, it's volcanoes, or it's sunspots, or it's some other thing. And it showed a number of graphs to show that those things are not correlated with the temperature. So most of the skepticism, I think, was, let's say, persuasively handled by the Bloomberg article. So 80% of what you hear in terms of the skeptics, what they say is like, oh, you forgot to count this, or it's really some other source. The Bloomberg thing did a good job of sort of wiping them away. But there's one skeptic and one line of skepticism that is not addressed by the NASA data, the NASA page, and was not addressed by the Bloomberg article. So there's a gap. And Tony Heller, who's a well-known skeptic in this field, he's the best representative of this unaddressed part. And the unaddressed part is, he doesn't say that climate change is being caused by other things than CO2. That's a different set of skeptics. And if you conflate what Tony Heller is saying, which is going to be about the reliability of the temperature measurements, if you conflate him with the other skeptics, then he looks crazy too, because he gets associated with skeptics who are not credible, right? So most of the skeptics of climate change are just tinfoil hat crazy bastards. I get tons of people sending me charts that they apparently made at home of why the climate is really connected to sunspots or some other thing. And none of these charts have any credibility, they're not sourced right, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of non-credible skeptics. But Tony Heller is a special case. so I'm going to say as clearly as possible while I'm plugging in the power to my phone, that I'm not going to claim that Tony Heller's arguments are right. I'll just tell you what they are. So his claim is that the temperature data has been rigged. In other words, actually just illegitimately fudged to create the impression of sudden warming. And his argument, if I can summarize it, goes like this, that we do have records from, let's say, press reports of what NASA and other sources were reporting was the temperature in the past. And we could see that those past reports of what the temperature was no longer agrees with the current database of what the temperature was. So in other words, the public record from the same sources clearly shows that they used to say it was warmer, but they fudged the data, according to Tony, to make it look cooler so that the modern day would look like it had increased quickly. Now, here's the fun part. What is the counter to his argument? There's a counter to the sunspot people. There's a counter to the volcano people. There's a counter to most of the skeptics. And there may be a counter to Tony Heller, but I haven't seen it yet. So if you've seen it, tweet it to me and I will update that list. But notice if you will, and I say this not because of, how should I say this? The thing I'm going to say next is said with all due humility. I'm trying to say this without looking like I'm just complimenting myself, because I don't want that to distract from the point. The point is that a tweet from a cartoonist, in other words, my tweet with these 4 links, is so far the best debate in the world on climate science. It's the best debate in the world on climate science. And it's not even good, because nobody else has even attempted to look at the arguments and try to get them in context and try to figure out, okay, if you're saying A, where's the person who's saying A isn't true? Can we find that person? And if they do say that, what is the counter to the skeptic? Have you ever seen anything like that? I haven't. So the closest we've come to trying to drill down on this is my tweet. And I put that forward as something I would love you to fact check and tell me I'm wrong. I would love you to tell me, Scott, you just don't know much. This has been debated very well, and here's a link to it, and you can see that exactly what you wish would happen, the point and the counterpoint about the same topic. It's already been done. Show me the link. I've never seen it, and I've seen a lot of stuff on this topic. It seems like that's exactly what I would see if it existed. It would be the first thing people would send me. So here's my preliminary ruling on climate science. And my ruling will be on the persuasiveness of the arguments, not the truth. So my claim is that I'm not qualified to know, is climate changing? Is the temperature going up? I don't know. Is it coordinated or correlated with CO2 primarily, the humans cause? I don't know. Don't know. But I can talk about persuasiveness. So independent of what's true, what looks persuasive? And I would say that the current advantage is with the skeptics, but not all of the skeptics. The skeptics who are saying it's a volcano, no, they are not persuasive. The skeptics who say it's sunspots, they are not persuasive. There's another set of skeptics who say, look at my graph from the past, and you can see that the warming in the past, and we're talking about distant past, in the history of the planet, they'll say, look, it's very consistent. The CO2 follows the heat. The heat goes up first, and then 800 years later, the CO2 rises. So therefore, the causation is backwards. Here's what's wrong with that. Why did that suddenly change? Because the whole point of climate, the hockey stick, is that at the moment, meaning let's say the last 20 years, in the last 20 years, there has not been an 800-year lag between the rise in one and the rise in the other, meaning CO2 and temperature. So if the skeptics are saying, look, we have proof that first you have temperature go up and then 800 years later you see the CO2 rise, well, how come it's happening at the same time now? Why is there no 800-year lag? Why is CO2 going into the air at the same rate, according to the climate scientists, at the same rate? All right? So somebody's saying not true. Well, if it's not true that the CO2 and the temperature are quite aligned at the moment in our current day, if that's not true, then that goes to Tony Heller's argument that some things have been, maybe the data has been fudged. But I don't think even he makes the argument that one is following the other. So I would say that the argument that one follows the other is, first of all, true from a scientific perspective, in the sense, and you can fact check me on this, I believe it's true that CO2 can raise temperature at the same time it's true that a rising temperature changes the environment in a way that releases more CO2. So I think they both happen, but we don't know exactly the relationship there. Now the other link in my 4 links was somebody discussing how the 97% of climate scientists agree is bogus. Now here again, here's the argument. The argument is that 97% of climate scientists are on the same side. And then you look at the critic who says, no, no, no. The 97% are really just people who have an opinion that the temperature is going up, all right, and that CO2 has a role, which is very different from saying everybody's on the same page, all right? So the critic has the stronger argument there because he's pointing to details, and if you look at the critic, it's a stronger argument. But where is the response to the critic? Where is the person who looks at the critic and says, okay, I see what you're saying. You're saying that these are not all in agreement, but you're wrong because X, Y, Z. Where's that? Now, lacking that, I give the credit to the last argument, which is the critic. So the critic has made a reasonably credible sounding criticism of the 97%. And then I haven't seen, but maybe it exists, I haven't seen a critic of the critic. And without that, do you really know anything? I would argue that the lack of it might, raise your alarm, but the lack of the argument doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that for sure it means that I haven't heard it, but beyond that, you can't be sure. All right. I hate to bore you with all this climate stuff, but in many ways, it's the most interesting thing in the world because you've got a few things going on. One is that this is either a giant psychology, mass hysteria, or it's the biggest problem in the world. Either way, it's really interesting. And I think that there's also a good argument, by the way, from the critics who say that warming temperatures have historically been associated with, good things for humans. That humans just do better when it's warmer. And that there will be as many places that turn from inhospitable to hospitable, or even more of them, than there will be places that are already too warm, and adding a little extra warmth will make them unlivable. So that gets to the argument about the economics. Can we really know that climate science is even good or bad? We cannot know. All right. Let's talk about what else is happening. Oh, the Middle East. So I saw an article written by the previous was it the ambassador to Syria under Obama. So this is an Obama appointee, no friend of President Trump, right? So he's an Obama appointee, and he knows a lot about Syria because he was the ambassador. And here's what he says, which is quite different from what you've been reading in the mainstream news. So this guy who knows more than any of us know about Syria, because he served there, and he's no friend of President Trump, that's important, says that Trump is probably doing exactly the right thing. And here's the context that he adds. He says that, first of all, there's no long-term scenario where the U.S. Has to live in Syria to protect part of their population. It's not our country. We don't belong there unless we've got a specific mission, which is largely done. So from a conceptual level, I think he agrees that we don't belong there if there's a way to get out without too much pain. Now, how do you get out, of course, is the tricky part. And apparently the Kurds are already talking to the Russians and to the Syrian government, and apparently they've always been in contact. So the Kurds have never cut off diplomatic contact with the proper government of Syria. So it may be that getting the Russians and the Syrians to give them some protection against Turkey attacking on Syrian territory might actually be a pretty practical thing to do, because the only ones who seem to, desperately want them all dead is the Turkish forces. So Syria, of course, has fought against the Kurds, that's my understanding, but they would certainly be happy for the Kurds to say, okay, you win, you're the government, just make sure we don't get slaughtered. Now, could you trust anybody over there? Yeah, probably not. So there's a trust problem. But the other thing that the prior ambassador to Syria said is that the patch of land where the Kurds are is kind of worthless. So apparently the oil wells there are almost tapped out, and the oil is not a big part of the Syrian economy anyway. So it's sort of a worthless piece of land that we don't really need to protect, and probably the Kurds can get some kind of protection elsewhere. And then beyond that, we're going to keep our bases in Iraq. So if we need to come back, we can come back. But the interesting thing is that I think the president and maybe, Jared Kushner, I think they're playing a bigger game. It looks like they're trying to line things up for a much larger agreement that probably depends on pushing Iran into either agreeing with us with whatever we want, or at least getting out of the way. Now, when you hear that the U.S. is removing the forces from the area and that Israel has a free punch anytime they want, in other words, there's nothing stopping Israel from just, continuing to bomb things in Syria if they're bombing people who would be, a danger to them in the future. So probably Israel is going to get a little bit savage as we pull out, which, by the way, is going to take a while. We're not going to pull out until we've figured out how to do it in a way that works. But I think Israel is just going to start mopping up anybody who had an Iranian connection. So, any Hezbollah types, I think Israel just will mark them and take them out one by one. And maybe we just need to get out of the way. Because the other thing I wonder about is, does Israel have the same rules of engagement that U.S. forces do? Now, I realize that our forces had more relaxed rules of engagement under Mattis and Trump, but don't you think Israel has even, let's say, even more permissive rules of engagement? Meaning that the best thing that could happen over there might be for the U.S. forces to just get out of the way? Because Israel's not going to cut any corners, right? They're going to take care of business because, their existence as a state or as a country depends on it. So I think that they would be far more aggressive than we would. Now, here's the interesting thing. If it's true that, Iran and Qatar and, whoever's aligned with them, they all seem to be on the ropes right now. The people who are aligned with Iran are all losing, it seems to me. And Iran seems to be losing because the worst thing that could happen from Iran's perspective, I would think, is for Russia to have more control in Syria. Because, Russia's not going to want Iran to have as much control there. So that seems like a natural competition there. Trump is shifting the ally relationships. That is true. And here's the part that gives me the most optimism about the Middle East right now. It has to do with the players. And I've said this before, but I keep going back to this. Imagine in your head President Trump in the same room with Putin, Netanyahu, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, bin Salman, and just think about how capable those people are, and also how flexible they're going to be, and how strong they are as leaders, and how willing they would be to do things that other people wouldn't do. So here's what you have. You have the highest level of tolerance to risk and willing to think outside the box and just really smart, right? I'm not sure, I don't know how important China is to the Middle East at the moment. That's sort of an empty spot in my knowledge with other empty spots. But it seems to me that we have exactly the right leaders, even if you don't like them. Even if you have your problems with those leaders, you can imagine them in the same room and it all looks good. Because in some ways, they're all the same personality. They're all smart and bold, and they're willing to take a chance. They're willing to work with whoever they need to work with to get something done. They're all practical. I don't know, it's the most productive group of leaders that have ever been on the same side trying to solve the same problem, and I think I would bet on them. So I'm going to bet that things are going to be good in the Middle East, meaning the trend will be good. There, of course, will always be problems, but that the trend will be positive. North Korea still has nukes. Let me explain North Korea. If you are in a long-term negotiation with somebody, what you don't do is give up your stuff first. You make sure that you're giving up things at the same rate as the other team is giving up things. The United States has not given up anything that's as big as North Korea giving up their nukes. Now, we have given up some things. We've stopped doing our war games. We've had summits. We've, given prestige to North Korea. So we've given up things. But there's nothing we've done that's as big as them giving up their nukes. And it makes sense for them to hold out because that's the big prize. If they give up their nukes, if they give up their nukes tomorrow, why would we even give them, any kind of, let's say, trade deals or, maybe aid in rebuilding? If they gave up their nukes, we would just stop caring and they would get nothing else. So I think they're using it for leverage, but keep in mind that at the same time that North Korea, may or may not be fussing with their nukes to take them to the next level without testing them, the United States capability is improving at the same time. The United States isn't sitting around just waiting for North Korea to improve their nukes. Every day that goes by, the U.S. has better eyes on North Korea, better intelligence on North Korea, better targeting information on North Korea, better plans, and better technology. So no matter how quickly North Korea is developing their nukes, we're kind of developing things pretty quickly on our end too. So it's not clear that they're getting some kind of military advantage that's significant. So I would say that how much should you worry about them still having nukes? Not much at all. Because even if we went all the way to the end of the process and North Korea still had nukes, why would they aim them at us? Why would North Korea aim their nukes at the United States when we just basically said, okay, we don't want to be your enemy anymore? It just doesn't make sense. It would be a huge expense that would, cripple their economy and give them nothing. Nothing. There's nothing to gain from it. There used to be. It actually made a lot of sense before to threaten us because we threatened them, and it was, make things a little dangerous for us. But at the moment, I don't see any benefit that they have, and I can't imagine they see it either. So we could get to the point where North and South Korea try to, work together better for 50 years. And then someday, 50 years from now, North Korea says, why do we even have these nukes? What the hell good are they? They do nothing for us. Let's get rid of these things. So I'm not worried about North Korea's nukes because all the things that matter are going in the right direction. And weirdly, the nukes at the moment don't really matter because they don't have a reason to use them against us. As long as things are going in the right direction, and I don't see that changing. All right, I'm just looking at your comments. Unsealed indictments, not interested in them. I'm not interested too much in the legal speculation stuff. But I would note that it seems that the legal stuff has slowed down. Oh, there was a story today. You heard the rumor that there was some rumored secret tape of President Trump when he was working on The Apprentice, alleged to have used the N-word, and that it had been recorded, and somebody had the tape. And I just saw an interview with some reporter who just spent a whole bunch, for the New Yorker, I think, who just spent a whole bunch of time trying to find that tape. And apparently talked to all the right people, and all the right people said, I don't know of any tape. So apparently that's fake news. So it is fake news that there's some kind of tape of the president using the N-word. And should we be surprised that that was fake news? No, we should not be surprised at that at all. Yeah, what about Omarosa's tapes? Well, we'll wait for those, won't we? Yeah, Omarosa just disappeared, didn't she? Somebody wrote an article on North Korea. All right. What's the headline from the New York Daily News today? All right, I'm just looking at your comments here. Yeah, and as the reporter for the New Yorker said, if someone had that tape at an organization where it's mostly enemies of the president, if someone had a tape like that, imagine how much they could sell that tape for. Thoughts on the new Russian nuclear technology? Well, my understanding is that the new Russian technology would help them thwart our missile defense that's on their border. But I ask you this, our missile defense isn't that good. It's not like anything changed, right? Russia had the ability to nuke Europe and the United States at the same time, and Russia still has the ability to nuke anything it wants at the same time. So the new technology of the Russians is impressive, assuming it works, but I don't think it changes anything on the ground because I don't see now Iron Dome, I doubt that's 100% effective. Iron Dome just catches as much as it can. And if you've got a nuclear transaction with thousands of nukes, it doesn't take too many of them to get through to have a bad day. Yeah. All right. Any other questions here? Yeah, the other thing that was in the news is that I guess Putin made some kind of a statement to say that he wanted to work better with the United States in the coming year, and that they wanted to coordinate better on a wide range of topics. Now, that's the same language that you're hearing about China. So the U.S. is trying to cooperate better on a wide range of topics with China. At the same time, Putin is saying, hey, we'd like to have better relations and agree on a wide range of topics of common interest. I've been saying this for a while, and I'm starting to convince myself the following might happen. The three countries that have the most reason to get along are Russia, China, and the United States. And the three of us should have some kind of an understanding that we're not each other's enemies, because we can't be. None of us can defeat the other. None of us want to try. Why are we picking on each other with this small stuff? We've got the three biggest, militaries in the history of civilization, and we're just doing small ball stuff, with each other. So it feels like everybody's going to understand their best interest is to just stop treating each other as enemies, because we're just not natural enemies. We have a natural reason to coordinate and to be friends. We have all the natural reasons to be friends, and we have no natural reasons, except psychology and history, to be enemies. We just don't need it. Nobody is better off this way. There's no way that Putin is saying to himself, I like it that we're always doing stuff to them and they're always doing stuff to us. That's just the way I like it. There's no way he thinks that. There's nothing that Putin would like better than to not be at odds with the United States. I have to think that somewhere in our respective deep states, that the leaders of both the United States and Russia maybe can't stop their deep state people from screwing with each other. And maybe the leaders don't have as much control as we'd like them to have. I'm a little bit confused about why we treat Russia especially as an enemy. I understand that they're doing bad things, but why? What the hell? What are they trying to gain, unless they're just paying us back for whatever bad things we're doing to them that we also don't really need to do? All right, that's all I got. I will talk to you later.